Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Friday morning and welcome to A Better Way of Life. No jiggery-pokery. That's what it says on the back of this can. I like that. No jiggery-pokery. For anybody that's driving at this moment and can't see that, it's a back of a Coulston pressed rhubarb pressed fruit can. It's deliciously tart, just like this show.
Jiggery-pokery. I was going to
No
say.
jiggery-pokery. I really love the sound of that.
It's like the word shenanigans, which I was. A
Mm.
friend said shenanigans yesterday to me, and I thought I love shenanigans is a sort of word I would use because it's kind of like you're talking about stuff you get up to, and it may have a little bit of naughtiness to it, but it's just something that you're up to, and it could possibly be something you shouldn't be doing.
Yes.
Or maybe.
We have a special guest who shall be joining us shortly. She's waiting for an Amazon parcel as we speak. So we won't bring her in just at this moment. We'll give her another minute or so because they're about to arrive at her door. It's a bit like Uber or Bolt or, you know, those taxi services where she can see it on the little app getting closer and closer. It's quite exciting, isn't it? Like the gamification of it, you know. And I like it when they tell you your driver, Kevin, has just stopped at the shop to get some sweets. He'll be there soon, though. There we go.
It's always a Toyota Prius.
Now I'm gonna quickly, before we're joined by our guest today, I'm going to say I'm getting a little bit fed up of people coming into my DMs on LinkedIn in the last week making assumptions, right? And I've just had one a few moments ago who said, "You must be struggling, as all of us are at the moment, with the sort of downgrading of everybody's accounts and the lack of people looking at you." And I'm thinking, no, I'm not struggling at all. But why make that assumption? Why make that assumption about anybody?
What I will say, though, should I be daring and mention this?
Yes.
I'm not going to name names because that would be absolutely hypocritical given what I'm about to do. And I've seen it a fair bit on LinkedIn. I don't know if I have seen it on Facebook, but is people sharing other people's posts that they don't like. When I'm ish okay with if somebody has not been very nice themselves. I say ish because I still don't think we're doing a parent thing here. Two wrongs don't make a right. But if you're going to call somebody out on something, you shouldn't really be doing something that's not very nice yourself.
Yeah.
But if you are going to share someone's post, and I had this done on me by somebody who at the end of it, you know, the post said, "I'm sure you're really nice," and something else. And I thought, well, you just did something not very nice to me. That if you are going to share a post of somebody's that you didn't much like, number one, think, could you have approached that person personally about it? Particularly, it wasn't anything nasty about that person. It was just something that person didn't really like. Or number two, could you approach the person and say, "Would you mind if I shared this?" Or number three, share the content, but just don't put the name of the person.
Yeah.
Because it just wasn't very nice. I'd have literally, if I had that done to me, and I have had it done, it would have been so upsetting. And I just don't think professionally it's a very nice thing to do.
I think it's an awful thing to do.
And actually, the guest we've got on, the reason why I saw the first time I saw her post was because she was very honest about something, and it was all to do with the Coldplay thing and all this kind of stuff. Was that calling people out publicly on things, and even, you know, I see people do it on LinkedIn when people's behaviours they don't like. Somebody did it about driving earlier on, and I tried to put across the point, maybe they did this, it was to do with school drop-offs. I absolutely get that there's way too many cars, but a lot of people were saying, well, they're selfish dropping their kids off and they're this and that. And I said, hang on a minute, right? A lot of people can't get their children into schools on their doorstep. Often parents are juggling dropping kids off at different schools. I'm not saying that a lot of the time it probably is just people driving kids to school because but I think we just have to be a little bit kinder, and I just see a lot of people sharing stuff and calling people out, and I am always that Karen, if you want to call it that, who will go, I know, but.
Yeah. Well, the way I feel about it is, if you, I don't think you should actually name and shame, right? I don't think you should do that. I think that is actually going against the rules anyway. I don't think you should name and shame. If it's one of those situations where it's like, a sex pest or whatever else, and I can understand in those situations people wanting to do it, especially if the platform isn't listening. I think firstly, platforms, you need to listen more, right? If someone's got a genuine issue with someone, you need to listen more. That's the most important thing here, right? Because someone shouldn't be driven to that in the first place. It should be dealt with. But secondly, I think if not, you need to try and find another way. You should ultimately try and find another way of dealing with it. I think then what you should do is perhaps warn a number of people quietly about it if you think that it's likely to happen to other people or whatever. But in general, I see a lot of the time that it's done, it's just a way of getting engagement. It's just a way of, I
had a problem in my gym, and I'd tried various routes to try and sort it, and I went above, and that was ignored. And then as a last ditch attempt, I went back to the club and said, could somebody on this level try and see whether this level is dealing with it? To which that manager, which was a different one, actually said, would you like to sit down and talk about this? I said, I absolutely would love to. And I said, I have spoken to the guy over there who was particularly rude to me, didn't even get up out of his seat. I talked about my whole struggles and stuff, and he said, what would you actually like? Nicely, he said, what would you like? And basically, it's because our gym, they're having a refurbishment, and it has been really disrupting, to be quite honest. And he listened to the whole of, for me, it's my safe place. And so when they start messing around with it, and I'm paying a lot of money to be there, I'm kind of not okay about that, actually. And to not go, you'd have to still pay 25%, or you cancel. And then if you want to rejoin, you're going to pay more. So I gave him a solution, and he accepted it and gave me more than I wanted. That's kind of how to do it.
Good for him. Good for him. Right, let's get our guest in. Apparently, they're good to go. The parcel has probably arrived now. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us. You've got your omega-3. You're good to go. You're healthy. You're wise. Your body is going to be fit. Omega-3, actually, people don't realize this. Omega-3 is something that most of us are lacking, is it not?
Yes, it's true, apparently. I learnt a bit more about it this morning from Julia Bradbury on BBC Breakfast. She said that ultra-processed foods have massively risen our omega-6 and depleted our omega-3.
And overfishing has caused part of the problem as well. And
so we are lacking in omega-3.
We are, and it's impacting our cognitive ability.
I'm even more because I don't eat fish.
Yeah, and this is probably why we're seeing such ridiculous posts on LinkedIn now, because everybody's cognitive processing is diminished.
Oh, there seems to be an awful lot. Can I just, before we go on, are you a Caroline or a Carolyn?
I'm a Carolyn.
Carolyn, thank you.
Yeah.
I just had to
As somebody once said, it's what you do at Christmas.
Carolyn, you see, that's clever, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering how I Hobdey at Christmas.
I could show you if you like.
Oh yeah, great. That sounds like fun. Oh, we've arrived on your door and we're going to Hobday for you.
Yes.
Yeah. What is it you do, Carolyn?
So my background traditionally is that I'm an HR professional. So I did that for many years in some big corporate settings. And over the last number of years, I'm self-employed. So both a keynote speaker and an HR consultant, HR and leadership, really. I try and build leaders that people want to work for.
Cool. Tell us, how do you get into keynote speaking? Because that's an interesting area, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm going to be a keynote speaker,
Yeah, a lot of it is about building profile, building content, sort of being really clear about the message that it is what it is that you speak about, as opposed to I'm just a speaker. Then it's about making sure that people know what you stand for, what you speak about, what your key thing is. It kind of helps, but I've published some books, so people booking keynote speakers tend to like people that have got books to back that up. So that helps a little.
Well, it helps you as well, because you've got a sale out of a sale as well, presumably. You know, if people like hearing part of the journey, and then they can read on and do a little bit more, and then actually you don't have to say everything that you were going to say in the book, because the book's there to back it up and take it that little bit further. No, I get that. So you've got to have some kind of purpose or meaning, or some kind of big, message for the world.
Yeah, I think that's the place to start. I mean, in my own situation, and I don't know, obviously I can't speak for other people, but I have a lot I could speak about. I've had a very interesting corporate life. I've had a very interesting personal life. I have a lot that I could go at. So really, in the first instance, it's about focusing in on like, what's the thing that you're going to talk about. But I actually also think it's important that you're not just a one-trick pony, that's not just the only thing you speak about and try and make a living out of. For me, it's about, this is the core message, but actually off that come several other different things that I could speak about. So I have a lot of content, so sometimes trying to channel it into sort of one core message is a challenge.
That's really interesting, because Ray and I've talked about that quite a bit, because there's a number of things that I could talk about, and actually what I find is that often when I want to get that out there or give my story on that, I lost my dad to suicide, and I've done quite a lot of supporting other people around that, but I've not made it my living, because I feel quite strongly that I don't want to be that. It's something that happened to me. I carry it with me, but it's not me. So Graham and I have talked about this quite a lot. As you said, it can become that you're that and nothing else, whereas actually I use a lot of my other skills to help with that. And actually going through that experience is also, I've got a son that's got heart conditions as well, and I've got ADHD, and I was diagnosed later, but those things don't define me. And I think that maybe what you're getting at, it ends up defining you and kind of loses all of the other bits that you're good at, which is the HR and leadership bit.
Yeah, and it's, life is a rich tapestry, as they say, isn't it? And I think that's also the thing, is that, and I posted about this recently on LinkedIn, is that actually life's really messy. We're messy, and it's, and I posted about the fact that it's okay to go, I'm messy. I'm not perfect, and I spent a long time in my life, presenting perfect, as many people do, and I think many women do in particular, I have to say, but many people in general. And it's okay to be messy. And I talk to clients of mine, and certainly people that sort of message me in the background, people that direct message me, who then share about the messiness of their life, and somehow we're ashamed of that messiness. And yet, oh my God, like, some of my messy stuff is A, some of my best comedy stories, but also B, some of my best experience, my lived experience that I can bring. And is it hence the, you talked about the Coldplay post, that was a messy situation, obviously, for them, but it was a messy situation that I posted about in relation to that. But I think it's what makes me relatable. It's what makes me real, and it makes me go, I've screwed up in my life, and it's been messy, and some of my decisions have not been good and right. And it's a little bit like people misunderstand sort of the point behind the title of my first book, and think I'm pointing the finger elsewhere, whereas in actual fact the point of the book was that I was pointing directly at myself and going, I need to be different and better.
Okay, what was the title?
Am I all right to swear?
It's a sweary one, I think.
Do it like, if you can.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll do it a different way. I'll say it's titled All the Twits I Met Along the Way. Maybe that's good enough.
Yeah, great. That's a better way to do it. Yeah.
It's funny, Graham talks about that we're all messy, and I really, it's funny because I'm not the popular person out there, but actually I would often say that I am quite popular in my own little quiet way, in the DMs, even in my own personal life. I always say I'm the person that people say, oh, I forgot to invite you because I assumed you were really busy because you're really popular. And I said, but whilst you were all assuming, I wasn't. But I'm always the one people come back to, and people tell me stuff, the stuff I know about people. And do you know why they say? It's because someone said about if you're at school, somebody will tell you a secret if you tell them a secret. And I genuinely believe, as you said, Carolyn, that if you're open and honest, and like people say to me, you are, Marianne, you just wear your heart on your sleeve, therefore people almost can't help but tell you stuff because you've said it. And I'm like, well, why would I be ashamed of like me?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that, you know, what you're referring to there, as I sort of talk about it like a door, you know, like vulnerability is a door, isn't it? And if you open that door and you stand there and go, here, you know, I've opened the door and I'm going to be a bit vulnerable, you can then sort of stand there and see, well, you know, who opens their door or who sort of steps through yours. And if people don't, that's fine, you know, because for some people that vulnerability is too much or too uncomfortable, or they don't want to, or you're not the right person. But I think if you do that and you sort of just open the door and go, hello, you know, here it is. Now you can choose then whether you sort of close that door on that person, or whether you open the door again, or whether you actually then step through the door and are even a bit more vulnerable and encourage them a bit further. But that's kind of how I see it, is that you're opening a door to somebody, like you say, to share something with you because you've shared something. You don't need to share all of it. You know, you don't need to fling the door wide open, but you know, you just actually just open it and go, you know, hello, let me tell you something about me. And I think that's the thing, when you do that, people reciprocate.
Yeah, no, totally.
Absolutely. I think it's key. We see a lot with coaches that there's a lot of people that have had, I'm not going to get on my soapbox about this, but there's a lot of people that have had coaching or teaching about how to coach, and they haven't really, not very well if they have, because it's the same as going to see a counsellor. I go every week, I go and see therapist, counsellor, whatever you want to call it. I just got back from her earlier and I love going. I absolutely love going. If I've had a bad week, I'm like, I cried at the beginning of today's, and we finished off with her saying, I'm really proud of you with what you've done. But I think, I don't know, people that seem to be doing this coaching seem to think it's all about things being perfect, and it's what they want it to be. Do you see what I mean? It's like they've got an agenda and you have to fit that. Whereas the way I see it is, it's like you open that door and you sort of go, right, okay, just give me a bit about you.
Well, let me pull these two things together, because going back to what you were saying a minute ago, yeah, I talk time and time again about being messy, right? Because I used to work in the field of human factors. So you talk about everything that we do in terms of these kind of human factors, and you know, there's ways in which people do things, and a big part of that world as well was inclusion and equality and diversity and all of that, you know. And we were talking about it just before we came on, all very much a fan of all of those things. But the trouble is, what we kind of forget in all of those things is that actually labels and defining people and putting labels on people is actually excluding as much as it is including, right? And for me, it just comes back down to communication. And what we do in terms of communication is we assume communication all of the time, because we are ultimately fairly selfish as people. We think about ourselves, although we can pretend that we, you know, actually think about others first. We ultimately think about ourselves first. We can't understand other people as much as we can understand what's going on in our own brains. And so there's a lot of assumptions around communication, how communication is received, what I'm saying. I might understand that what I'm saying now, you might not agree with it, but ultimately I might not understand why you're not agreeing with it in a particular way. Right. I'm gonna bring something of my history, what I've learned in the past, my belief systems, etc., to the conversation. I can't help that. That's just the way it is. What we really struggle with as people is laying all of that down. It's going, okay, I do not understand other people. I do not understand how other people think. I do not understand how other people communicate or want to communicate. I do not understand how you think about this, etc. And therefore, tell me. I want to learn. I want to understand what you want first. And we're seeing it at the moment on LinkedIn. We every day now are having conversations with people where they're going, I'm not getting the results that I got used to get on LinkedIn. Nobody loves me anymore. Oh, what's going on? And ultimately, what's going on is that the algorithm at the moment, which is partly, always have to say this, is partly digital and partly the people, right, have got fed up with things being a certain way, and they're now wanting people to make sure that they're actually spending time on there, right, actually getting to know people, etc. So all of this, I can just push it out into the ether and then hopefully I'll get some results, isn't happening anymore, and people are getting a bit shocked about this. What's having to happen now is that people are having to communicate, and we're not very good at it. And that's why, folks, that's why you are struggling out there at the moment. It's because you're not very good at communicating, right? You spend so much time communicating like that. You're not very good at all of this.
Well, I think also the people who have historically posted and got godlike vibes or they create those godlike vibes. Whereas Carolyn, when I read your post, it resonated for me straight away. Well, it did, because I just felt really uncomfortable about people joking about people's private lives. I'm just not okay about that. I never will be okay with anybody. I just thought it was vile. I saw so-say professional people making jokes, ripping into, and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, look, actually, unless any of us know the ins and outs of it, and arguably only those two people are going to know, or three or four, however many you want to say, whether you want to include both parties, that actually, who's to say that she wasn't being this, or, you know what I mean? There was a whole load of stuff there, as far as I'm concerned, that we didn't know, and I don't need to know. You don't need to know.
We all make those assumptions straight exactly. In the moment.
So when I saw you post what you posted, I thought, gosh, thank God. There were some people, and I'm going to say some. I actually think more people probably had that. Would probably in their own life would feel the same, but they get whipped up into that frenzy of social media. And my first words I say to people is, how would you feel if that was a family member of yours that was being written about?
Yeah, it's absolutely that. And I think that, I think your point, Greg, about our ability to communicate, and the thing that makes me most sad is that because what bothers me so much is there's so much of this kind of fear, cancel culture, scaremongering type thing, is that we're shutting down communication rather than opening it up. And it's like, and on any subject really, but you take
we're scared to be different. We're scared to be different,
but we're scared to ask a question in actually more than anything else. And I think if you think of the sort of top handful of ones that are like letting off a hand grenade, racism, gender, anything sort of diversity related, I don't know what it's like to be a black woman, because I'm not one.
Because you're not one.
I don't know what it's like to be Muslim, because that isn't my religion. That's not that's not my background. That's not how I was raised. But it's like we can't even ask questions about it. And actually, the way that we will improve our understanding, the way that we improve things like diversity and inclusion, is being able to have a conversation that comes from a place of good intention but ignorance, that says, like, I've heard this, or I think that, or I was told this when I was growing up, or I've read this in the media, you know, is that right or not? But it's like, oh my God, you can't even ask that question. And actually, you know, this is some of the posts that I've been putting out recently. Is like, we've got to start like having these conversations so that we can start building some understanding. And a lot of what I'm writing about at the moment actually is about men. And I don't know if you've noticed, and I'm not going to sort of prove it on camera, but I'm not a man. So, you know, but it's, you know, I think it's really important, you know, that we have some of those conversations. I think there's some real benefit in the fact of me being a woman and starting those conversations about creating space for men to take the mask off and whatever, because, you know, traditionally men sort of find that quite hard amongst themselves, because there's kind of a you know, but it's actually should be okay. It should be okay for us to talk about things as long as we come with good intent, as long as we come with curiosity, rather than, you know, condemnation and assumption and accusation. And exactly what you talked about, Graham, I've got a leadership development program that I've developed, and the first module of that is exactly what you talked about, is let's take a look at what my beliefs are, what my assumptions are. How do I come at the world? Because I will come at the world on the basis of all of that experience and beliefs, and particularly, you know, my childhood stuff. If I don't know what that is, then I don't actually know the lens in which I'm looking at the world through, and therefore I won't understand why it is that I react a certain way, or I can't get on with a certain person, or I can't connect in certain circumstances. So we actually, it's about that self-understanding and being honest enough with ourselves to go, this is the lens I look at, and none of those lenses are wrong. None of those lenses are wrong, because they're just our conditioning.
Don't you think this is why this is really interesting? You said it. I had a conversation with my husband last night. He was saying at his work, they've got all sorts of stuff going on, and he said, and then one of the managers, he said he's very hot-headed, and he's this and he's that, and he said it's not too much of a problem for me because of X, Y, and Z. And I said, because I'm not bothered, or something like that. I'm bothered by, because of someone's management style, other people shouldn't have to flex themselves to be with that. And it's really interesting that you start off with that in your book, because so many people don't have management or leadership training. They don't have it. Therefore, all they're actually doing is their best, which is their best. But if you've never had any guidance with that, the same as I talk about training, and I think there's a lot of similarities with management and management, leadership and training. I say to the people that I teach how to teach, many of which don't have training at all. If you start a training session off by saying you're not allowed to eat in this room and you can't do this, and you start dictating at people, and then I question them, but why are you saying that? And they said, because I don't agree with eating in a room. And I said, it's not actually about you. It's not actually about you.
Do you know what? I think this is one of the most fundamentally important things about some of the training stuff that you do, Marianne, which is that actually it's not about I've gone through this and now I have this qualification and now I can train.
No, absolutely not.
It's actually about the fact that most people that come to that assume that they can train. And what your training does is unpack training for them so that they realize that there were bits about training and how that lands with other people that they've never considered. And I think actually this is the big problem in society. We're not doing enough where we unpack ourselves and what we already know or already believe and go, that could be right. Well, that might be completely wrong. And this is why these days, and I'm going to say actually since COVID, I think it's really, really difficult. This is why management leadership is incredibly hard, right? And I think it's gone beyond sort of like, you know, oh, actually you can stick someone on a management training course now, and actually now it would be successful leadership training. Because actually what you've really got to learn there is how can I adapt whatever skills I've got in my bag at any time to now what I find in front of me, because of that landscape, what's there is changing and will change so rapidly now that it's, you know, and we know, we've seen these posts on LinkedIn, really stupid, annoying stuff, right? Where big leaders have said, I've written a cheat sheet for neurodivergence. I've written a cheat sheet for mothers who don't work. I've written he's just like, what? You've written a cheat sheet for something to do with people? How can you write a cheat sheet? Because every individual that's in front of you is different, right? We really, really, really need to stop thinking this is simple and that we can just, because that's the biggest mistake. Oh, I'll just do this.
Yes.
I'll just go through this process. I'll just learn this. And then when I come out the other side of it, I'm now an expert. No, you're not. None of us, we're going to go to our graves not being experts. That's the truth.
Absolutely. And the reason I was smiling, Graham, is that actually my leadership development program and framework is called Simple, because I think that leadership is really like flipping hard, but it's not complicated. Now, and the reason it's not complicated is that actually exactly what you say, if you come at each individual as, oh, funnily enough, an individual, and actually have tools in your toolkit and some self-reflection about you and how you approach situations, then actually the things that you do with that person are quite simple. Now, is it hard and challenging? Like, absolutely, it's hard and it's challenging, because as we know, we've got 5 different generations potentially now in the same workforce. Now, that's even just assuming, that they're all in like their own like 5 different buckets, but within that bucket you've then got a ton of individuals, albeit that they've probably got some similarities maybe about sort of when they were born and the society they grew up in, etc., etc. But even then, it's a ton of individuals, even if you take those 5. So it's really, really diverse, in the true sense of the word. But for me, I wanted to call my framework Simple, because it's actually, for me, it's about going back to basics. It's about going back and going, there are some really straightforward things you can do. And this whole sort of and mystery, in particular around leadership, where it's like, oh, it's some sort of magic cloak that you put on or whatever, is not actually true. Because really a lot of what I teach is about saying you kind of just need to turn up as a human being and see other people as human beings. And actually it's giving you some skills around that.
It's such a breath of fresh air, because I do what I do, and I do it, and that's it. I would probably have in the past, maybe not so much now, seen other people use those big management words or big training words or whatever, and think, oh, I couldn't do that. It's not imposter syndrome, because I got my feelings on that. But sorry, I've had a son visit me, and now my mum's just coming down.
Hi, Mum. Hi, son. Nice. Yeah, it's lovely.
She bought me a cup of tea.
Real life.
A cup of tea.
Oh, that's nice.
Okay, let me just get it from her.
Can I have one too?
Yeah.
Carolyn, did you want a cup of tea?
I would have loved a cup of tea. That would have been really nice.
Look at that.
She just visited and she just made me a cup of tea.
There's no other podcast where people make you tea.
I think I do wonder. I see. Am I sorry to say this? I'm not sorry to say it. I'm going to say it anyway, because I think you probably agree anyway, Carolyn. There's quite a lot of women that are quite brash and shouty about what they do. Their message can be. And Graham and I have talked about this. I think there's quite a lot of women that try and act in the way of the men that they don't like.
Pseudo men. I call those pseudo men.
And the funny thing is that quite a lot of people have said to me, most of the people you converse with or your friends are men. And I said, in the business world, and I said, yeah. And I said, I think I know why you're going to say it. I said, but that's not true. Well, I don't know if it's true, but it might be. But I said, actually, what it is to do with is that I'm happy with who I am. I'm good at doing what I'm good at. I don't try to be that pseudo. What did you say? Pseudo man.
Pseudo man. Yeah.
I don't try to be like that. And so actually, I tend to I talk about what I do, and then what will happen is, in particularly male-dominated sectors, because this is what tends to happen. So security, construction, I will sort of be saying my thing in those worlds. And I then get those men come to me saying, oh, I see that you are the go-to person, or I've heard, for training. Can you help me with this? I know that you know this. Can you help me develop this program? And I'm like, yeah, this is brilliant. You know your stuff here. I know my stuff here. And actually we can get together and come up with something. And there's no threat. There's no egos. It's just good. Like, it's great. And I don't think I see enough of that. There's a lot of this pseudo man thing. And I find it, I laugh about it, to be quite honest, because I wrote a post a while ago saying, if I met you in real life, do you think that what I see and the vision I would, or the person I would make in my head of who you are, do you think that's who you would be if I met you? And I think there's an awful lot of women, and again, I'm going to stick my neck out here and say it, and I came across one earlier, are neurodivergent. And I think they are ones who probably haven't done the work on themselves. They've probably got the label, but they've not done the work. I'm
going to stick up for you here as well, because I'm going to say, being in the fortunate position of being a spy, right, and being able to sit behind other people's profiles on LinkedIn and seeing how other people speak to other people, women are very sly with other women. Right, much more than men.
Just say it.
I'm going to get a lot of. I'm going to get, but
it's true. True.
It seems that way. I'm sure there's lots of lovely ladies out there that are great, but it does seem that when a lot of women reach a certain amount of success, they seem very kind of careful about sharing that success, or what they're going to, how they're going to help other women.
Right? Yeah, I think that can be really true, in as much as we are conditioned that there's only so much of that success to go around for us. So like, if you've got that success, then it's like you hang on to that success. And I'm not saying that means that women don't help other women. I do know of women that do. Yes. But it's a much deeper level.
There could be.
There's a much deeper level. We're told that it's a competition, and we're told that there isn't much to go around. So if you smash through the glass ceiling, then there's not an awful lot of space. So like, if you manage to take up a bit of that space, then it's that competitive thing. And I say it goes right the way back. If you go back years, hundreds of years, the reason that you get this kind of competitive, almost sort of catty thing, that like dialogue narrative that sits around females, either overtly or covertly, is very much we were reliant on men to provide us a roof over our head, and therefore food and shelter and safety, and therefore it's a competitive environment. So that competition is really, really deep, in terms of my safety, my survival, my being part of the group is reliant upon me almost competing with other women to make sure that the alpha male, or someone close to the sort of center of power, is protecting me. Women didn't have the right to buy their own home or have their own bank account. That's actually in sort of recent memorable history, that was even the case. So you go back even further. So I think it's deeply built into our psyche that there's a need to compete with other women.
You don't want to let any of it go. Can I just ask your thoughts on? I saw yesterday a post. Do you think I can say that person's name? Who I said, this isn't. I can, because I'm not being horrible about this person. I don't even know them, and they're just.
Love it. I can say it because I'm not being horrible.
No. What I mean is that, so Mel Robbins, I've not read anything. I've not seen anything. All I know is about the let them thing. So I'm not being horrible. I don't know anything. All I know is that I was hearing somebody saying something about how they felt about that movement, and my question I was going to ask you was that I see people, I suppose it would be man or woman actually, but I think there's a difference with men and women here, that when somebody will come up with something, and apparently, I say apparently, it was somebody else's idea, all of that, and it was hijacked. But what I then see is that people then treat people like God, these people like godlike figures, and they can say and do anything they want. And they've got all these people, many of them women. And I just wonder how this then works then, because you do get women worshipping these people. Is it because they want to be in the same gang as them? Or because it's not like they're benefiting? I mean, what I do see is that people run networks and people like to be in those networks, and I think there's a lot of FOMO that goes on within that actually, if you ask the people, why are you in this, they'll go, oh, because I'm going to get all this from it. And you think, are you though? Or is it just you actually were in a gang and you wanted to be associated with other people that were in this gang? But I just wonder if people actually stop and say, do you really know the person that's at the top? Do you really align with their values? Because I think people often don't even think. Because that person at the top often doesn't actually say very much of, like you would say, Carolyn, like the real stuff. They often don't.
People are butterflies, aren't they? People are butterflies.
What's going on with people? I mean, Carolyn, I don't know what your thoughts are on. I just put you on the spot there with it. It just seems an odd phenomenon.
Yeah, and I think Graham's right. You know, people are butterflies. I think that, like, again, I think social media is great, isn't it? But it also has a lot to answer for. So we know that. We know it's a double-edged sword. And it's on a similar vein. You know, I was reading something, I think it was only yesterday, where somebody was saying about things like the fat loss jabs.
Yeah.
And that you started off with, personal trainers who were like, this is the worst thing ever, you need to lose weight by, doing it safely and exercise and right nutrition and all these things, which is true. There is, that is the safe, healthy way to do it. And a lot of those PTs have now flipped and gone, well, I'll work with you alongside the jab. So they've gone from being like, like the jab is terrible to I'm working sort of with it and alongside it. And it's like, well, what's their real view? And is it right that they should change their mind because maybe now they know more? Or is it because they've gone, oh, if I don't work alongside this jab, I'm not going to get any clients, I'm not going to get any money because I'm going to drive away the ones that want to do the jabs and whatever. And I think it's really difficult because I think there's, people need a roof over their head, so you can kind of understand on the one hand, but people sell out.
I think a lot of this come down to money. I was watching, whilst you were watching BBC One, I was watching ITV. And then Dr. Hillary was on. I missed the bit that I wanted, which was why it wasn't good to have your phone while you're on the loo. And I was like, clearly you've not been a parent that's had children knocking at the door and won't leave you alone. It's only a minute piece, and the dog. But the other bit that came on, it was they had a figure of, it was obviously AI generated or something, of a influencer, they called it. And this influencer, the neck was out like this. It was a really weird figure, and the hair was quite thinning, big chest, big lips, really like sunken eyes and stuff. And they were like, well, what the heck's going on there? And they were saying obviously it was the lips because that's what everybody else has done. The neck was because looking at phones. The hair was because of the hair extensions. And it made me just sort of think about the whole influencer thing, because they were talking about what is an influencer. And I would say actually that influencer, if you wanted to be a true influencer in the real sense of the word, it would be that you almost don't want to be seen and talked about in those godlike ways. But I just think so much of this now has got down to people just needing to make money. And Graham knows that we've talked about me needing to change what I do, because I will hold my hands up here. There isn't the work now in doing what I do because people aren't prepared to pay for quality. Companies aren't prepared to, because they'll just do it, a cheaper way. And I've had to change. I've had to think about other things I can do that align with my values, because I will not compromise on that. And I just think it's a real shame, because so many people are changing and going against their actual values. And I just think you've got to have to sit there. I know that I can happily say to anybody with anything that I do, I did that because that's what I believe, or I would.
And I think that's the thing that you should really take out of it more than anything, which is that, you know, that struggle to come round to something you can do that you're happy with doing and maintain your values, not maintain value, but maintain your values. That the struggle is the most important thing, because if you don't go through that struggle, if you just flick a switch to pivot, the dirty word that everyone used in COVID, if you just pivot to the next thing that just makes you the most money or whatever, without considering the values that you have or what you're about, then ultimately that's what makes you, you know, shallow as both as a person, and it makes your business shallow as well. You know, there's nothing really of value in what you're doing. You're just there to make money.
I don't see how you can speak passionately. I mean, you must see it with leaders that you work with. That for me, I mean, you know, I struggled being employed as a teacher because I didn't agree with a lot of things I had to do. And in the end, I was like, actually, this is compromising me and my family too much. I've recently had to look at maybe getting a job, and I'm like, not because I don't work hard, but I've also had to climb down from certain values that I've got, which are I'm right. And I'm like, sometimes you have to step down from what right is, if you see what I mean. Because actually you can't change the world. And I'm just accepting that I will change some things that I can. And I just wonder with people that, like, you know, when you're working with managers, with leaders, that if they're working somewhere and they don't agree with those values, because I know I've had trainers before and they've come on my course and then I've said to them, they've said, oh, I have to do it that way. And I say, but do you have to? Oh, yeah, they've told me I've got to. And I said, but part of the reason you're coming on this course is because I need you to take back that knowledge, because actually the people that have told you what to do potentially don't know what they're talking about as well. So you will bring your knowledge. They might have some, they might not have some, and then we can change it. And I just wonder if sometimes you've got some leaders that are maybe at odds, and they never should be in that position, because if they can't or don't want to get the other people to listen to them, or they're compromising themselves
all the time. I think so much, not least because one of my passions these days is about sort of, and hence why I, you know, develop my own framework, is about trying to dismantle this leadership blueprint that says a leader looks like this. Because regardless of all the other models that have come in over time, essentially I would say that if we would just describe what we think a leader is, it would still sound like Donald Trump. You know, that's what we're describing, right? There's a reason that he's leading, you know, the biggest part of the free world, because we think that's what a leader looks like. Actually, now he's at the extreme, but you know, that very, you know, confident, charismatic, assertive, you know, borderline aggressive, bit of a bully. You know, actually, that command and control type of leader is still what we think leadership looks like, even though we sort of go, oh well, there's servant leadership and there's authentic leadership and there's all these other things. We default back to this command and control because we think that's what leaders look like. And I think for so many leaders, that completely goes against the grain of who they are. And I posted about this only the other day, that I said that, you know, that terrible boss that you've got, if you went and asked their family, what would they say about them? And they'd probably go, they're kind, they're lovely, they'll do anything for anyone, you know. But this idea that we sort of turn up at work and, you know, we put on, and again, I'll avoid saying, but, you know, we sort of put on this bit of a git kind of mask and go in, you know, is still part of the issue that we have. And I think so many of those leaders, it's not really aligned with who they truly are, because actually, again, I spent 25 years, you know, working in big businesses, you know, sitting at the boardroom table, often, you know, being the only female very frequently, because like you, I've worked in, you know, very male dominant environments, and the conversations you'd have outside of the room, you know, that they would often gravitate to me, I think because I was female, B, because I was HR. They'd gravitate and they'd be like, well, you know, that was a bit like bullying, wasn't it? And, you know, they don't feel comfortable with what's going on, but they also don't feel able to speak up and say something. And I think that we have this terrible masking that's going on, lots of misalignment. between what people actually think and feel versus what they present in those scenarios. And I think it's a big problem. And I think I often end up talking to businesses and leadership teams about their values and doing work in the business around their values, because I think often we're just really not honest about what those values are. And I do some work, this based on a sort of well-known model, but I do some work where we talk about accidental values, because actually, what are the values that we're actually espousing by the way that we behave, that we maybe don't like very much? They are actually very beneficial for this organization, but we need to start being honest about them, because those are the real values that your employees are actually experiencing, not the ones that we go, so integrity, honesty, and all the like nonsense values that people come up with that they have. And I think a huge misalignment, I think, for a lot of people, and like you say, a lot of men, a lot of men are there.
I'm seeing as well that I'm seeing maybe that's why I do get there's a lot of men that speak to me. I don't know why. Maybe it is because of that, allowing them to be vulnerable. And it's probably the same as you've had, that someone said to me the other day, but you don't judge. I could tell you anything and you wouldn't judge. And I'm going to say this, my best groups I have are groups of males that work in very male dominated sectors, or who work in the corporate world, because I absolutely love it, because I come from I'm like somewhere way over there, that they probably I've seen a lot of men that will think I'm a little like ditzy little thing that doesn't really have a clue what they're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, that's part of me. I'm a laugh, but cross me and I probably will take you down a peg or two. And a few of them have seen me do that, because actually what they see is that I will challenge them and that I do know what I'm talking about. And those are the ones that often come back and say, it was because I was coming at it from where I always had. So construction sector I work in, and I said, I really like and wanting to be working in those sectors, because they'll say, well, we have to do it this way. And I said, but if you're teaching people in that very male dominated way, in ways that are, you're sexist, you're not thinking about equality and diversity, that is not going to work. You can stand there and tell me that's what you're going to do, but it will get you in trouble in the end. And when you can't keep staff, that's why you can't. I said, so you can either listen to me or absolutely not listen to me. It's entirely up to you. And I think that's why I see so many similarities between leadership and management and training. And the funny thing is, what you said about what a leader would look like, I never would have said that I was, when in actual fact, the more I hear is that actually you probably would make quite a good leader, Marianne, because I saw it as somebody that was not me. But actually it is somebody that's compassionate. I know somebody, a male friend of mine who's a leader, who would say, people say that I'm too soft, I'm too this, too that. And I said, you know what, out of all the men I know who are leaders, you are literally the best one I know, because you give away opportunities to let others learn. You are kind, compassionate, you're all those things. And for that reason, you get the best out of your employees.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book that I always refer to, which I think is fortunate it was written by a man, because I think if it was written by a woman, it wouldn't have got the same sort of traction. But called "Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders?" And how to stop it. And it's a brilliant book because it talks about exactly that. And I refer to it a lot because it talks about male traits and female traits. So it's not about men and women, but it's about traits. But the reality is that those male traits that we talked about, the Donald Trump type traits, and obviously we see him be successful, so we go, oh, that must work. But the reality is of what employees want to work for are the female traits. And you're absolutely right. It's that compassion, that teamwork, that generosity in terms of sharing opportunities, the collaborativeness, which aren't females, they are just female traits. Is absolutely and what I love about the book, it's all based on research and statistics. It's not just pontificating about a point of view. Can absolutely back it up, that says ultimately the leaders, the teams, the businesses that are most successful have those leaders with those female traits, because that's what people want to perform for. People will do so much better in an environment where it's like that, that's less fear oriented, much more collaborative. People want to work in that.
I think it's starting to change, and I think it's starting. I mean, and oddly, and I know I always bring training into it. When we talk about culture change, I often say that doing the bit that I do, if I can get people that are involved in any of that to do with training, if I can get them to start seeing that anybody who's involved in training anybody that works for that company, if they start seeing that behaving in a certain way isn't okay, that's how you start making change. Because right from the outset, people see that that's not how you behave, that's not acceptable, or this is how you behave. And and if nothing else, like when I get those groups of men, I get them to talk about stuff. When they're next to each other, they open up about stuff, and I think there's no way you would do this. There's literally no way you would do this in your workplace. And sometimes I'll say, I wouldn't do that here. And I say, well, you're going to go back to be training your staff now. You need to make sure that they see that it's okay, because that's how you bring that change about, because you're modeling it.
Yeah, I think there's another interesting point here as well, is that within most organizations, there may be a leader, but quite often there's leadership.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other interesting things here is that, context has a really important part to play here, because it's actually okay for people to be different in their leadership styles, or different in terms of what they bring, but it's whether they're in the right place, right? It's whether they're, what they're bringing to the table is actually going to cause rub, or it's actually going to be beneficial, right? For example, I mean, you talk about, I'm not going to mention his name because I don't really like him, but you mentioned certain leaders that are a little bit brash and a little bit pushy and whatever. Actually, in some positions, that's quite useful, right?
Absolutely.
If you need to get something done, you need to get people to make a decision and move things on and whatever. There are some times when that skill set is really, really useful, but it's about placing those people in those positions and actually working with them to know when they should butt out of other stuff, where actually the more emotional or intelligent stuff should be going on. Those are not people to put in front of people that need sensitivity, right?
No, not at all. And I think it's absolutely back to your point though, Graham, is that actually leadership has got harder because the different hats that we're now needing to wear. And I think we've always needed to wear different hats as a leader with different individuals, but now I think that's got broader and broader, and therefore it's got more and more challenging for people, because you're right, sometimes you can wheel in a different leader for a different context, but often that same leader has to be different things in those different contexts. They've got to be able to put on those different hats, and that's what's really challenging, because it's exactly that. I always say nobody wants to be coached out of a burning building, do they? No one. You just want somebody that's just going to tell you, like, this is what we're going to do and we're going to get out, right? Not somebody that's going to go, so what do you think the solution might be in this dangerous circumstance? So, but we've got to be able to, understand as leaders where our strengths are, where our natural inclination is as a leader. But I think we've got to be honest about that, because again, I think most people would sort of answer that in a way that's like, oh, a leader looks like this, so I need to sort of do that command and control thing, when in fact that's probably not who they truly are. But we've got to be able to put all those hats on. We've absolutely got to be able to flex, and that's the next challenge of leadership, and has been for some time. How do we get leaders to be comfortable with wearing those different hats to deal with all those different individuals?
Do you think that, I'm just going to ask quickly, do you think that most leaders and managers have had training? Do you think there's more that do or don't? I think I know the answer.
Don't. Yeah, very, very rarely.
Accidental and incidental.
Yeah. Absolutely, just by circumstance. I mean, just time and time again, if I even think to the organisations I worked, was employed by, and then the organisations that I go into these days as a consultant. Yeah, it's mostly we've promoted you. You now have people responsibility, and then some way down the line we go, oh crikey,
And the amount of money that must cost in.
Oh, huge.
I bet the cost of getting it wrong. Massively
Enormous.
outweighs the cost it would cost just to put, I'm going to say just, that awful word, but it is just in that respect, put somebody on some training or to learn how to do it properly. I bet that would cost a lot less.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I see that in a couple of ways. I always use engineering managers as my best example. We take the best engineer and then we give him people responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there aren't good engineering managers and leaders, because there's some brilliant ones, but mostly they're really people, and they just happen to technically have been the best person at doing that job. And then the number of them I've then removed because we've made them a leader, and then it's like, oh, they're rubbish. And so I end up like removing them. In fact, they were actually our best engineer. So we've not only removed the leader, we've removed probably the best engineer we had.
And then done damage to them as well, because they probably got given something they didn't want. And then now they feel rubbish because they failed, but they were quite happy, as you said, just being an engineer. Not just being, but
Yeah, and I think it's that thing of having those different opportunities. How does somebody make money being really good at what they're good at, rather than giving them people responsibility? But that's a whole other conversation about technical ladders versus leadership ladders. But yeah, I think it's, and I've compromised so many people out of businesses because their line manager wasn't having the conversations that they needed to have to improve their performance. It's just like, oh, we just need rid of them now. So we've spent vast amounts of money compromising people out because their line manager didn't manage them.
Wow. We have to end it there.
Thank you,
Carolyn. Thank you for coming today. Otherwise, we can't push this out on Friday because the software gets a little bit like that at me when it's over an hour. So, but thank you so much for coming along. I was kind of in mind of the quote, which is actually a misinterpretation of Shakespeare, the mortal mime of life, in which we are apportioned roles which we misinterpret. For anybody that knows where that comes from, I do, but I'm not going to share it with you. You can just show how clever you are afterwards when this goes out. We will be back soon. I don't know, I've got a little bit of echo there. We will be back soon with more of the same, but until then, from Carolyn and Marianne and myself, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for joining us today. If it stirred anything within you to make you want to further the conversation, please do connect with Carolyn, Marianne, or myself on LinkedIn, and we will continue to have the conversation with you. Until next time, bye for now.